The storm arrived just after sunset. Thick clouds swallowed the Louisiana sky while rain hammered the empty highway stretching endlessly through the swamp lands. Drivers who traveled those roads during the 1970s often feared becoming stranded because gas stations and motels could be separated by dozens of lonely miles. On nights like this, people prayed to see any sign of life glowing somewhere ahead in the darkness. That was when travelers first noticed the diner. Hidden beside the highway stood a small roadside inn with flickering neon lights buzzing weakly against the rain. The building looked old even for its time, with cracked windows, faded paint, and a wooden sign that simply read Barbara's. Yet despite the worn appearance, the smell drifting from the kitchen felt strangely inviting to exhausted travelers fighting the storm outside. Barbara Q herself became part of the mystery almost immediately. Nobody knew exactly where she came from, and locals rarely spoke about her past. Some people claimed she had once been married to a wealthy butcher from Texas, while others whispered that she arrived in Louisiana alone after fleeing some terrible tragedy years earlier. Whatever the truth was, Barbara never corrected the rumors because she preferred silence over explanations. Despite the mystery surrounding her, Barbara quickly earned a reputation for kindness. Truck drivers described her as warm and welcoming, especially toward lonely travelers who spent most of their lives on the road. She remembered customers' names after meeting them once, asked about their families, and always made sure nobody left hungry. In an isolated part of Louisiana, filled with dangerous roads and violent storms, Barbara's diner slowly became a safe haven for strangers passing through the darkness. But there was one thing people remembered more than Barbara herself: the stew. Travelers claimed her beef stew tasted unlike anything they had ever eaten before. The meat was unbelievably soft, the broth rich and flavorful, and the smell alone could make exhausted drivers stop their cars instantly. Soon, truckers across multiple states began talking about the strange roadside diner in Louisiana that served the best stew in America. For years, life around the diner seemed normal. Travelers came and went while Barbara quietly ran the inn alone beside the swamp. Then the disappearances started. At first, nobody connected them because missing people along American highways were sadly common during the 1970s. A hitchhiker vanished near the Louisiana border. Weeks later, a traveling mechanic disappeared during a work trip. Then another report surfaced involving a salesman who was last seen stopping for gas somewhere near Barbara's highway. Police initially blamed robberies, accidents, or criminals roaming the roads, but rumors slowly began spreading among the locals living closest to the swamp. Some residents noticed a disturbing pattern. Many of the missing travelers had reportedly eaten at Barbara's diner shortly before vanishing forever. A few people even claimed they had seen abandoned vehicles hidden deep near the swamp behind her property late at night. Still, nobody wanted to accuse the woman who had fed half the county during hard times. Then came the night that changed everything. During the autumn of 1974, a traveling salesman named Raymond stopped at Barbara's diner after his car broke down during a violent thunderstorm. Exhausted from hours of driving through rain and darkness, Raymond entered the diner hoping for a warm meal and somewhere safe to sleep. He had no idea he was walking into the story that would later become one of America's darkest roadside legends. Barbara welcomed Raymond warmly the moment he stepped inside. She handed him a towel, poured him hot coffee, and insisted he try her famous stew before worrying about his broken car. The salesman reportedly felt relieved because the storm outside had become so dangerous that leaving again would have been impossible. Like countless travelers before him, Raymond soon found himself staring at a steaming bowl of Barbara's legendary beef stew. At first, Raymond thought the stew tasted incredible. The broth was rich and powerful, while the meat felt softer than anything he had eaten before. But after several bites, he noticed something strange hidden beneath the spices, a flavor he could not recognize but somehow deeply disturbed him. When Barbara asked whether something was wrong, Raymond nervously smiled and forced himself to continue eating. Because floodwaters had swallowed parts of the highway, Barbara offered Raymond a cheap room upstairs for the night. He accepted immediately since driving anywhere during the storm would have been suicidal. But according to Raymond's later testimony, the upstairs hallway felt strangely cold despite the warm diner below. Every floorboard creaked loudly, as though someone else was moving somewhere in the darkness beyond his room. Hours later, Raymond awoke suddenly after hearing heavy footsteps outside his door. At first he assumed another guest was walking through the hallway, But the sounds continued slowly for several minutes without stopping. Nervous and unable to sleep, Raymond quietly approached the door before peeking through the narrow crack into the dark corridor outside. What he saw next would haunt him forever. Barbara stood alone in the hallway, dragging something wrapped inside a blood-stained blanket across the wooden floor. The object looked horrifyingly human in shape, leaving dark streaks behind as she slowly moved toward the staircase leading downstairs. Raymond reportedly froze in terror while watching Barbara suddenly stop moving before slowly turning her head toward his room. In that moment, he became convinced she somehow knew he was watching her. Panicked, Raymond locked the door and searched desperately for a way to escape. According to the story, he climbed through the tiny bathroom window before dropping into the muddy swamp behind the inn. Rain soaked his clothes as he ran blindly through darkness while branches tore across his skin. Behind him, the diner's neon lights glowed faintly through the storm like the eyes of something waiting in the night. After reaching the highway, Raymond flagged down a passing truck driver who took him to the nearest police station. Officers initially doubted the bizarre story because Raymond looked exhausted, terrified, and half delirious from fear. But after hearing about the blood-stained bundle and the growing number of disappearances connected to the area, investigators agreed to search Barbara's property at sunrise. None of them expected the horror they were about to uncover. Police cars arrived at Barbara's diner shortly after dawn, while fog drifted across the swamp behind the building. According to the legend, Barbara greeted the officers calmly and even offered them coffee before the search began. She reportedly showed no signs of fear while investigators moved through the diner room by room. That calmness unsettled the officers more than anything else. The first disturbing discovery allegedly came from the basement beneath the kitchen. Hidden behind rusted storage shelves, officers reportedly found blood-stained tools, torn clothing, and personal belongings belonging to missing travelers. Some investigators later claimed the basement smelled overwhelmingly rotten, as though death itself had lived there for years. The deeper they searched, the more horrifying the evidence supposedly became. Behind the diner near the swamp, investigators allegedly uncovered shallow graves buried beneath muddy ground. Human remains were reportedly found hidden among the swamp grass, while horrified officers realized the rumors surrounding Barbara might actually be true. News spread rapidly across Louisiana as terrified locals wondered whether they had unknowingly eaten something far darker than beef inside Barbara's famous stew. Fear consumed the town almost overnight. Newspapers exploded with horrifying headlines calling Barbara Q the cannibal cook of Louisiana. Reporters flooded the town while television crews interviewed terrified locals who described eating at the diner for years without suspecting anything evil. Some truck drivers even admitted they had returned repeatedly because the stew tasted strangely addictive. America became obsessed with the horrifying possibility that travelers had unknowingly consumed human flesh for years. According to the darkest versions of the story, Barbara eventually confessed during police questioning. She allegedly admitted targeting lonely travelers because nobody would notice they were gone quickly. One detective later claimed Barbara smiled while calmly explaining that fear made the meat taste better. Whether true or fictional, that horrifying statement became the most repeated line connected to the legend for decades afterward. But years later, journalists investigating the case began noticing strange inconsistencies. No verified police records fully confirmed Barbara's existence, and no official court documents matched the terrifying details spreading through newspapers and horror stories online. Researchers eventually discovered that many parts of the story closely resembled older urban legends involving roadside diners and disappearing travelers. Slowly, people realized the horrifying tale might never have happened at all. Even so, the legend refused to die. Decades later, internet horror videos and true crime channels brought Barbara Q back into popular culture once again. Millions of people watched dramatized retellings of the terrifying roadside diner story, debating endlessly about whether it was real or fictional. And somewhere in the imagination of those who hear the tale, the old diner still waits beside the Louisiana highway while Barbara quietly prepares another bowl of stew for the next traveler lost in the storm.